The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I watched Marcus adjust his cufflinks across the reception hall, the same subtle gesture he'd made 1,000 times during our 3-year partnership. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, he wasn't Agent Marcus Chen of the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. Tonight, according to the hushed conversation I'd overheard between my uncle and cousin 30 minutes ago, he was the man my family had hired to kill me. The irony would have been amusing if my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Here I was, Special Agent Isabella Rodriguez, standing in my grandmother's vintage lace dress, surrounded by 300 wedding guests who had no idea that half the people they were celebrating with belonged to one of the most dangerous crime families on the East Coast. And the man I'd trusted with my life for 3 years, the same man who'd pulled me from burning buildings and taken bullets meant for me, was supposedly here to end it all. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as I forced myself to smile and accept congratulations from distant relatives whose names I'd memorized from FBI surveillance files. Aunt Carmen kissed my cheek, her perfume heavy with the scent of gardenias and secrets. "Such a beautiful bride, mija," she whispered, but her eyes held something cold, calculating. Behind her, my cousin Diego nodded at Marcus, a gesture so slight that anyone else would have missed it. But I'd been trained to catch these things. I'd been trained to survive them. My new husband, my cover husband, though the rings felt surprisingly real on my finger, stood beside me, playing his role to perfection. To everyone here, he was Michael Santos, a successful contractor who'd swept me off my feet 2 years ago. The backstory we'd crafted was flawless. We'd met at a coffee shop in Little Italy, bonded over our shared love of old movies and weekend hikes. He'd proposed on a beach in the Hamptons with a photographer hidden in the dunes to capture the moment for authenticity. The Bureau had spared no expense in creating our legend. But legends, I was learning, had a way of becoming complicated when real bullets were involved. The reception was being held at the Palazzo Romano, a venue that had hosted more mob weddings than civilian ones. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces I'd studied in case files, men and women who'd ordered hits with the same casual ease as ordering dinner. My father's side of the family had built their empire on construction contracts and political favors, while my mother's people controlled the docks from Brooklyn to Newark. Together, they formed a network so intricate that the FBI had spent decades trying to map its full extent. And I was their key to everything. The operation had begun 4 years ago when I'd volunteered for the deepest cover assignment in Bureau history. Operation Family Ties required an agent willing to disappear completely to become Isabella Martinez, the long-lost daughter of Maria Santos, my mother, who'd supposedly died in a car accident when I was 3. In reality, Maria had entered witness protection after testifying against her own brother, but the family had never stopped looking for her daughter. When they finally found me working as a paralegal in Phoenix, it was because I'd allowed them to. The reunion had been everything the psychologist had prepared me for. Tears, embraces, promises that family would never be separated again. My grandfather, Vicente Martinez, had welcomed me with open arms and cold eyes that missed nothing. My grandmother Rosa had wept as he pressed rosaries into my hands and whispered prayers for my mother's soul. And slowly, carefully, I'd built relationships with cousins and uncles and family friends who treated murder like a business transaction. But somewhere in the process of becoming Isabella Martinez, I'd started to care about these people. Rosa's arthritis medication that I picked up every Tuesday. Diego's soccer games that he never missed. The way my Aunt Carmen still set a place at Hamley dinners for relatives who died years ago. They were criminals, yes, but they were also human beings who loved and grieved and hoped for better lives for their children. That was the problem with undercover work. The lines blurred until you couldn't tell where the performance ended and reality began. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on landing such a beautiful wife. His smile never wavered. even as his eyes swept the room with the same tactical awareness that had made him the Bureau's most effective undercover operative. We'd worked together on cases in Detroit, Miami, and Las Vegas, always maintaining the perfect professional distance. But something had shifted during the months of preparation for this assignment. The late nights reviewing family trees and criminal histories had become something more than work. The practice sessions where we'd rehearse our love story had started to feel less like acting. The wedding itself had been surreal. Standing at the altar in St. Anthony's Cathedral, surrounded by stained glass windows and the scent of incense, I'd found myself forgetting the cameras hidden in the flowers, the recording devices sewn into my dress. For those few moments, as Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger and promised to love and protect me until death did us part, I'd almost believed it was real. "Isabella!" My grandmother's voice cut through my reverie. Rosa Martinez approached with tears in her eyes and a small wooden box in her weathered hands. "This was your mother's," she said, pressing the box into my palm. "She wore it at her wedding, and her mother before her. I've been waiting 25 years to give this to you." Inside the box lay a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. The moment I lifted it from its velvet nest, I felt the weight of generations of women who'd worn it on the most important days of their lives. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion as Rosa fastened the chain around my neck. "Open it," she whispered. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen. My mother, at perhaps 16, laughing as she held a baby. Me. We were standing in front of a small house with blue shutters, my mother's hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. She looked so young, so happy, so unaware of the darkness that would eventually drive her away from everything she'd ever known. "She loved you more than life itself," Rosa continued, her accent thick with emotion. "When she disappeared, it broke all our hearts, but especially Vicente's. He blamed himself for not protecting her better." I clutched the locket, feeling the sharp edges of truth cutting through the comfortable fiction I'd built around this assignment. These weren't just targets in a case file. They were people who'd spent 25 years mourning a daughter and granddaughter they'd thought they'd lost forever. And I was about to destroy them all. Across the room, Marcus caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. It was our signal. Time to begin the next phase of the operation. In exactly 3 hours, FBI tactical teams would surround the building. By dawn, most of the people celebrating my wedding would be in federal custody. The evidence we'd gathered over the past year would put Vicente Martinez and his top lieutenants away for life. But first, apparently, someone in my new family wanted me dead. The realization had come during the ceremony itself, when I'd spotted my cousin Elena whispering urgently into her phone in the cathedral's vestibule. Elena worked as my grandfather's bookkeeper, keeping track of the legitimate businesses that served as fronts for the family's real operations. She was also, according to our intelligence, sleeping with a rival family's consigliere, a fact that made her the perfect candidate to leak information about tonight's planned arrests. If Elena had warned her boyfriend about the raid, and if he'd passed that information up the chain, then the Martinezes had exactly 3 hours to clean house, and the first item on their agenda would be eliminating the FBI agent who'd been living among them for the past year. The question was, did they know Marcus was FBI too? I watched him charm my great-aunt Lucia with stories about his construction business, the same cover identity he'd maintained for 6 months while we'd built our relationship in the eyes of the family. He'd done everything right. Attended family dinners, helped my uncle repair his restaurant's roof, even learned enough Spanish to make my grandmother blush with compliments. But something in Diego's posture as he approached Marcus suggested our time was running out. The music swelled as couples began to take the floor for the traditional first dance. Marcus offered me his hand with a smile that looked genuine even to me, and I allowed him to lead me into the center of the room. As we swayed to At Last by Etta James, I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching our every move. But it was the feeling of crosshairs that made me press closer to my partner's chest. "They know," I whispered against his ear, my voice barely audible above the music. "How much?" he murmured back, his hand tightening protectively around my waist. "Everything. Elena made a call during the ceremony. We're burned." Marcus spun me gently, using the movement to scan the room. When he pulled me back, his jaw was tight. Extraction? Negative. Too many civilians, too many family members who don't deserve what's coming. It was true, and we both knew it. In the months I'd spent living this double life, I'd grown genuinely fond of many of these people. My second cousin Maria, only 19, who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian and had no idea what her father really did for a living. My great-uncle Tomas, who'd lost 3 sons to violence and spent his days teaching neighborhood kids how to play guitar. My grandmother Rosa, who'd loved me unconditionally from the moment I'd walked back into her life. They were going to be devastated when they learned the truth. Some of them would never forgive me. Others would understand, eventually, that I'd been trying to save them from a life that would only lead to prison or graves. But tonight, all they would see was betrayal. 2 minutes, Marcus said. As the song ended and he escorted me back to our table, it was our code for the emergency extraction protocol we'd rehearsed but hoped never to use. In 2 minutes, he would excuse himself to the restroom. 30 seconds later, I would follow, claiming I needed to fix my makeup. We would meet at the service elevator that connected to the hotel's parking garage, where an unmarked bureau vehicle would be waiting. But as I sat down and reached for my water glass, I saw Diego approaching with 2 men I didn't recognize. Large men with the kind of scars that came from violence rather than accidents. Their suits were expensive, but couldn't hide the bulk of concealed weapons. "Isabella," Diego said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I'd like you to meet some friends of the family. This is Tony Castellano and his associate, Mr. Rossetti." My blood ran cold. The Castellanos were the rival family that Elena had been feeding information to. If they were here, it meant the situation had escalated far beyond a simple assassination attempt. It meant war. Tony Castellano looked like Central Casting's idea of a mob boss. Silver hair slicked back, expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of violence that seemed to follow men like him. His smile revealed perfect white teeth as he took my hand and kissed it with old-world gallantry. "Such a beautiful bride. Your family must be very proud." "They are," I replied carefully, my training kicking in. "When dealing with predators, show no weakness, make no sudden movements, keep your voice steady and your eyes alert." "I understand your husband is in construction," Tony continued, his gaze shifting to Marcus, who was making his way back from the bar with 2 champagne flutes. "Very lucrative business these days. Lots of opportunities for a man who knows how to build things up or tear them down." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt my hand drift almost unconsciously toward the small pistol strapped to my thigh beneath the wedding dress, a precaution that had seemed paranoid when I'd insisted on it that morning. Now it felt like the only thing standing between us and disaster. Marcus arrived at our table with perfect timing, his smile warm and unsuspecting as he offered me a fresh glass of champagne. "Sorry about that. Your cousin Miguel cornered me with questions about the honeymoon. I think he's more excited about Tuscany than we are." "Mr. Santos," Tony said, extending his hand. "Tony Castellano. I was just telling your lovely wife how much I admire the construction business." They shook hands, and I watched Marcus's face for any sign that he recognized the name. But his expression remained pleasantly neutral, giving away nothing. Either he was an even better actor than I'd thought, or he genuinely didn't know who he was shaking hands with. "Always happy to meet another businessman," Marcus replied. "Are you in construction as well?" Tony's laugh was like broken glass. "You could say I'm in the demolition side of things." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, polite small talk that carried undercurrents of menace. When Tony and his associate finally moved away, I felt like I could breathe again. But the reprieve was temporary. Across the room, I saw Vicente Martinez deep in conversation with his top lieutenants, their body language tense and urgent. Something was about to happen. I could feel it in the air like the pressure before a thunderstorm. "We need to leave," I whispered to Marcus as another couple approached to congratulate us. "Now." But even as I said it, I saw the futility of the situation. We were surrounded by 300 people, many of whom were armed, and all of whom would recognize the sound of gunfire. If shooting started in this crowded ballroom, innocent people would die, children would die, and I would have failed in the most fundamental duty of any federal agent, to protect the innocent. The locket around my neck felt suddenly heavy as I thought about my mother, about the choice she'd made to leave everything behind rather than watch her family destroy itself from within. Maybe she'd been the smart one. Maybe some battles weren't worth fighting. But then I looked at Marcus, saw the steady courage in his dark eyes, and remembered why we'd taken this assignment in the first place. These people, my family, deserved better than a life built on violence and fear. They deserved the chance to choose a different path, even if they hated me for forcing that choice upon them. The string quartet finished their set, and the DJ took over, the music shifting from classical to something with a heavier beat. Young couples filled the dance floor, while their elders watched from tables loaded with traditional foods. My grandmother's famous empanadas, my aunt's tres leches cake, my uncle's perfectly grilled asado. It looked like any other wedding reception, full of joy and celebration, and hope for the future. But I could see the shadow moving beneath the surface, the way certain guests checked their phones with increasing frequency, the subtle repositioning of men I recognized as enforcers. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen soon. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible thought was taking shape. What if Marcus wasn't just my partner? What if the man I'd grown to trust, to care about, to maybe even love, really was the assassin my family had hired to kill me? The thought hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making me grip the edge of the table for support. Because when I really thought about it, when I stripped away all the emotions and looked at the situation with cold, analytical clarity, it made perfect sense. Who better to get close to an FBI agent than another FBI agent? Who would have better access to my routines, my vulnerabilities, my deepest fears? Marcus knew exactly how I thought, how I moved, how I would react in any given situation. If someone wanted me dead, he would be the perfect weapon to use against me. But no, that was paranoia talking, wasn't it? I looked across the room at my partner, my husband, as he laughed at something my cousin said, and tried to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the possibility that he might be here to kill me. The Marcus I knew was honorable, brave, fiercely protective of innocent people. But then again, the Isabella Martinez these people knew was warm and loving and entirely fictional. Maybe we were all just very good liars. The music changed again, this time to something slower, more intimate. Marcus appeared at my side and offered his hand once more. "Dance with me?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made it sound less like a request and more like a plea. As we moved onto the dance floor for the second time that evening, I found myself studying his face with new eyes, looking for tells, for signs of deception, for any indication that the man holding me in his arms was planning to end my life before the night was over. But all I saw was the same quiet strength that had made me trust him with everything I held dear. The same gentle hands that had stitched up my wounds after a particularly brutal takedown in Detroit. The same eyes that had held mine steady while I'd talked my way out of panic attacks in the darkest moments of this assignment. Either Marcus Chen was exactly who I thought he was, or he was the most dangerous man I'd ever met. And I was about to find out which. The morning after our wedding, I woke up in the penthouse suite of the Palazzo Romano with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and my husband's arm draped protectively across my waist. For a moment, just one blissful, terrifying moment, I forgot that none of this was real. Marcus was still asleep, his breathing deep and steady against the back of my neck. We'd maintained separate bedrooms throughout our 6-month courtship, a decision that had seemed practical at the time, but now felt like another layer of deception. Because sometime during the night, when exhaustion had finally overtaken paranoia, I'd let myself curl into his warmth and pretend that I was just a woman who'd married the man she loved. The illusion shattered when I felt the familiar weight of my service weapon on the nightstand beside me. Reality crashed back in waves. The overheard conversation about an assassin, Tony Castellano's veiled threats, the knowledge that our cover was blown and federal agents would be moving in within hours. But it was the memory of my grandmother's tears as she'd placed the locket around my neck that made my chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. I slipped carefully from the bed and padded to the bathroom, catching sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, hair tousled from sleep, mascara smudged beneath dark eyes, wearing a silk nightgown that had been a gift from my Aunt Carmen. I looked like a bride the morning after her wedding. I looked happy. But my hands were shaking as I splashed cold water on my face and tried to center myself in the identity I'd been trained to inhabit. Special Agent Isabella Rodriguez, badge number 2847, assigned to the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force for the past 8 years, graduated top of her class from Quantico, fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, black belt in Krav Maga, expert marksman with both pistol and rifle. Single, no children, no romantic attachments that could be used as leverage. Except that last part was no longer true, was it? Because somewhere in the process of pretending to love Marcus Chen, the pretending had become real. I'd been so careful for so long. My apartment in Arlington was sterile, functional, containing nothing that couldn't be replaced if I had to disappear on 12 hours' notice. I'd never owned pets, never maintained friendships outside the bureau, never allowed myself the luxury of putting down roots. The job was everything. The mission was everything. And personal attachments were just weaknesses waiting to be exploited. But this assignment had broken all my carefully constructed rules. When I emerged from the bathroom, Marcus was awake, propped up against the headboard with his phone in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and something in his expression made me freeze. "We have a problem," he said quietly. I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly grateful for the distance between us. How big a problem? Elena Vasquez was found dead in her apartment 3 hours ago. Single gunshot to the head, very professional. Her boyfriend, Tony Ricci, is missing. The information hit me like a physical blow. Elena, who'd been so nervous during the wedding ceremony, who'd made that whispered phone call that had set everything in motion, dead because she'd tried to warn people about what was coming. Dead because I'd allowed her to discover the truth about the raid. "That's not all," Marcus continued, his voice carefully neutral. "The Bureau moved up the timeline. Teams are already in position around the Martinez compound. Your grandfather and his top people are being arrested as we speak." I closed my eyes, trying to process what this meant. Vicente Martinez, who'd welcomed me back into the family with such joy, Diego, who'd shown me pictures of his daughter's first communion just last night, Tomas, whose only crime was being born into the wrong family, all of them waking up to armed federal agents and the realization that the granddaughter they'd celebrated was the reason their world was falling apart. "There's more," Marcus said, and something in his tone made me look at him sharply. "Rodriguez, We need to talk. The use of my real surname instead of the pet names we'd developed over months of playing house made my blood run cold. I'd heard that tone before in briefing rooms when operations went sideways and agents had to make impossible choices. It was the voice of someone delivering news that would change everything. The Bureau ran background checks on everyone who attended the wedding, full workups, cross-referenced with known associates of rival families. They found something. He handed me his phone and I saw a photograph that made my heart stop. It was me, but not me. A surveillance photo taken outside a restaurant in Little Italy 6 months before I'd been reunited with my family. In the image, I was sitting across from a man whose face I recognized from FBI wanted posters. "That's Vincent Torino," Marcus said unnecessarily, underboss for the Castellano family. "The photo was taken 3 days before you made contact with the Martinez organization." I stared at the image, trying to understand what I was seeing, because I'd never met Vincent Torino. I'd never been to that restaurant, and I'd certainly never had a meeting with a high-ranking member of the Castellano crime family. "This is impossible," I whispered. "I've never seen this man in my life." "I know," Marcus said, and the gentleness in his voice was somehow worse than if he'd been accusing me directly. "But someone went to a lot of trouble to create evidence suggesting otherwise. The question is who and why?" My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Someone had set me up, created false evidence of collusion with the Martinez family's enemies. But who would have the resources to do something like that? And more importantly, who would benefit from destroying my credibility at this critical moment? "There's something else," Marcus continued, and something in his tone made me look at him sharply. "The Bureau found records of payments made to a Swiss bank account under your name. $50,000 deposited the day after your first family dinner with Vicente Martinez." The room seemed to spin around me as the implications became clear. Someone hadn't just created evidence of a meeting, they'd constructed an entire narrative suggesting that I was a double agent, that I'd been feeding information to the Castellanos while pretending to work undercover for the FBI. It was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness.
"Who else knows about this?" I managed to ask. "Director Walsh, Assistant Director Chen, and the agents running today's operation. They've been ordered to bring you in for questioning as soon as the arrests are complete." I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as I tried to process what was happening. Outside, the city was waking up. Normal people heading to normal jobs, unaware that lives were being destroyed in penthouses and family compounds across the 5 boroughs. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes, trying to think. Someone with access to high-level intelligence had orchestrated this. Someone who knew enough about my assignment to create convincing evidence of betrayal. Someone who wanted me neutralized at exactly the moment when my testimony would be most damaging to the Martinez organization. "You don't believe it," I said without turning around. It wasn't a question. "No, I don't believe it," Marcus replied immediately. "I've worked with you for 3 years, Rodriguez. I know who you are." But did he really? Because I was no longer sure I knew who I was myself. The woman who'd entered this assignment had been certain of her mission, her loyalties, her place in the world. But the woman standing at this window, wearing a silk nightgown that had been a wedding gift from criminals, carrying the weight of genuine affection for people she was supposed to betray, that woman was a stranger. I turned back to Marcus, studying his face in the morning light. He was still beautiful in the way that had made my cover story so believable. Dark hair that always looked slightly tousled, olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry, eyes the color of coffee that seemed to see everything. But it was the steadiness in those eyes that had made me trust him, that had made me believe he would never hurt me. Now I wondered if that trust had been the most dangerous thing of all. "We need to figure out who's behind this," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Someone with bureau access, someone who benefits from both sides of this war being destroyed. Marcus nodded, but I caught something in his expression, a flicker of something that might have been guilt. Rodriguez, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago. My hand moved instinctively toward my weapon before I caught myself. What? My real name isn't Marcus Chen, he said quietly. It's Michael Santos. The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael Santos was the identity he used with my family, the cover story we'd constructed for my fictitious husband. But if that was his real name... I'm not FBI, he continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was confessing. I work for the DEA, have for the past 6 years. The room spun around me as pieces of a puzzle I'd never known I was solving suddenly clicked into place. The way he seemed to know things about the drug trade that weren't in FBI briefings, the slight pause he had when discussing bureau protocols, the fact that his background checks had come through channels that I'd never been able to verify directly. Your DEA, I repeated, my voice flat. Joint Task Force, he said quickly. Everything else is real, our partnership, our cases together, the work we've done. But my agency affiliation, that was need to know. And I didn't need to know? The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. We've been partners for 3 years. We've saved each other's lives. We've shared everything. Not everything, he said quietly, and the admission hung between us like a blade. I sat down heavily on the bed, trying to process what this meant. If Michael, was DEA, then his presence on this operation made sense from an interagency cooperation standpoint. But it also meant that everything I thought I knew about our partnership was built on lies.
How much of it was real? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. All of it, he said immediately. Rodriguez, Isabella, everything I felt, everything we've shared, all of it was real. The only lie was which badge I carry. But was it? Because sitting there in the morning light, trying to reconcile the man I'd trusted with my life with the stranger who'd been deceiving me for years, I realized how little I really knew about truth and lies anymore. There's more, he continued, and I braced myself for another revelation. The DEA has been tracking money laundering operations through the Martinez construction business for 2 years. We have evidence that Vicente isn't just running traditional organized crime, he's washing money for international drug cartels. This was news to me. The FBI's investigation had focused on racketeering, extortion, and murder. We'd found evidence of corruption and violence, but nothing on the scale of what Marcus was describing. How much money? I asked. Conservative estimate? $200 million in the past 18 months. Vicente Martinez isn't just a regional crime boss. He's a key player in a network that stretches from Colombia to Canada. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was right, then my grandfather wasn't just the head of a family business that happened to be criminal. He was a major figure in international drug trafficking, responsible for flooding American cities with narcotics that destroyed communities and killed thousands of people every year. But he was also the man who'd taught me to play chess on rainy afternoons, who'd cried when I'd walked down the aisle, who'd promised that family would never abandon me again. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I wasn't sure you could handle it, Marcus said bluntly. You've gotten close to these people, Rodriguez. Closer than any agent should get to their targets. I've watched you struggle with the emotional aspects of this assignment, and I wasn't sure you could maintain operational security if you knew the full extent of what Vicente has done. The words stung, because they were true. I had gotten too close. I'd allowed myself to care about people who were supposed to be nothing more than subjects in a criminal investigation. And now that emotional involvement was compromising everything. The Swiss bank account, the payments that are supposed to be coming to me, are they from drug money?
Marcus nodded grimly. "Whoever set you up knows about the DEA investigation. They're trying to make it look like you've been taking money from the cartel operations," which meant that someone with access to highly classified information from both the FBI and DEA was orchestrating my downfall. Someone who wanted to destroy not just me, but both agencies' investigations into the Martinez organization. I thought about Elena, dead in her apartment with a bullet in her head. About my family members who were probably being handcuffed and read their rights at this very moment. About the web of lies and betrayals that had brought us to this point, and the growing certainty that Marcus and I were both pawns in someone else's game. "We need to get out of here," I said, standing up and moving toward the closet where I'd hung my clothes the night before. "If the Bureau is looking for me, they'll check here first." "Where are we going to go?" Marcus asked. I pulled on jeans and a sweater, trying to think like the fugitive I was about to become rather than the federal agent I'd been trained to be. "Somewhere we can figure out who's really running this operation and why they wanted me burned."
As I strapped my holster to my hip and checked the magazine and my service weapon, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me wasn't the happy bride of a few hours ago, or the confident federal agent I'd been for 8 years. She was someone new. Someone dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose. And maybe that was exactly what this situation required. But as we prepared to leave the hotel room where we'd spent our fake wedding night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking away from more than just a blown cover identity. I was walking away from the last chance I'd ever have to be someone other than Special Agent Isabella Rodriguez, someone who could love and be loved without calculating the tactical implications. The locket around my neck felt heavy with the weight of generations of women who'd made impossible choices. My mother had chosen to run rather than watch her family destroy itself. My grandmother had chosen to stay and love people who broke her heart again and again. Now it was my turn to choose. And I was no longer sure which path led to salvation and which led to destruction. 3 hours after leaving the hotel room, Marcus and I sat in a diner in Queens, watching news coverage of the FBI raids on our phones while trying to look like a couple having late breakfast instead of federal agents on the run. The footage was devastating. My grandfather being led away in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame, Rosa collapsing in Diego's arms as agents searched her house, children crying as their fathers were arrested in front of neighbors who'd known these families for generations. 27 arrests, charges ranging from racketeering to murder. 11 different locations searched simultaneously in an operation the news was calling the largest organized crime takedown in New York history. And at the center of it all, the story that Special Agent Isabella Rodriguez, the undercover operative who'd made it all possible, was now wanted for questioning in connection with possible corruption charges. My phone buzzed with a text from Director Walsh. "Rodriguez, report for immediate debriefing. This is not a request." I showed the message to Marcus, who frowned as he read it. "Too fast," he said quietly. "They're moving too fast on everything." He was right. Federal investigations of this magnitude typically took months to process after the initial arrests. The fact that they were already painting me as potentially corrupt, already demanding my immediate surrender, suggested that someone was pushing hard to wrap up all the loose ends before anyone could examine the evidence too closely. "We need to find Elena's apartment," I said, pushing my untouched eggs around on my plate. "If she really was killed for trying to warn the Castellanos, there might be evidence there. The scene will be crawling with NYPD and federal agents," Marcus pointed out. "Not if we're smart about it." My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer when I saw Rosa's number, but something made me swipe to accept the call, even though I knew it was a mistake. "Isabella!" My grandmother's voice was thick with tears and confusion. "Mija, what is happening? They took Vicente. They took Diego. They're saying terrible things about you on the television." My throat closed up as I heard the pain in her voice. "Abuela, Tell me it's not true. Tell me my granddaughter didn't betray her own family." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been preparing for it since this assignment began.
But hearing it in Rosa's broken voice, seeing the images of my family being led away in chains, made the reality of what I'd done impossible to ignore. It's complicated.
Complicated? Rosa's voice rose, and I could hear other family members talking urgently in the background. You lived in our homes. You ate our food. You let us love you. And all this time you were working with the police? I was trying to protect you, I said desperately. All of you. The violence, the drugs, the danger. It was going to destroy everyone I care about. Care about? Rosa's laugh was bitter and broken. You care about us? Then why are my sons in jail? Why is my husband's heart breaking? Why are our neighbors looking at us like we're criminals? Because you are criminals, I whispered, hating myself for the words even as I said them. And I love you anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. When Rosa spoke again, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. You are dead to this family. Do you understand me? Dead. Don't call to Swumber again. The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone while something inside my chest cracked open. Marcus reached across the table and covered my hand with his, but I pulled away. His touch, which had been comfort for so long, now felt like another lie. She has every right to hate me, I said finally. You did your job, Marcus replied. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Some of them had wanted to be saved. Maria, Diego's daughter, who'd confided in me about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Some of the younger cousins who'd talked about moving away from the family business, starting fresh somewhere else. They'd seen the trap they were born into, and I'd been their potential way out. Now they were all painted with the same brush, guilty by association, their futures destroyed along with their fathers and grandfathers. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Agent Rodriguez? The voice was young, female, scared. This is Detective Sarah Chen, NYPD. I worked the Elena Vasquez scene. I glanced at Marcus, noting how his expression tightened at the mention of his cover surname. What can I do for you, Detective? Can we meet? There's something about the crime scene that doesn't match the official report. Something I think you need to see. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but Detective Chen's voice carried the same note of desperate honesty that I'd heard in my own when I'd tried to explain to Rosa why I'd betrayed the family. Sometimes you had to take a leap of faith, even when you couldn't see the landing. Where? I asked. An hour later, we met Detective Chen in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from any federal buildings or police stations. She was younger than I had expected, maybe 28, with tired eyes and ink stains on her fingers that suggested she'd been working long hours on paperwork. I've been a cop for 6 years, she began without preamble. I've worked dozens of homicide scenes. What I saw in Elena Vasquez's apartment, it wasn't right. She slid a manila folder across the table, glancing around nervously as she did. These are copies of crime scene photos that aren't in the official file. Photos that my captain ordered me to delete. I opened the folder and immediately understood what she meant. Elena's apartment had been staged to look like a professional hit, but the details were wrong. The angle of the bullet wound suggested the shooter had been taller than Elena, but the blood spatter pattern indicated she'd been shot while kneeling. There were defensive wounds on her hands that suggested a struggle, but no signs of that struggle anywhere else in the apartment.
Someone killed her somewhere else and moved the body, I said. Detective Chan nodded. That's what I thought too. But when I tried to include that in my report, I was told to focus on the facts that supported the official narrative. Which is what, exactly? That Elena Vasquez was killed by her boyfriend, Tony Ricci, in a crime of passion. That Ricci then fled to avoid prosecution. Case closed, file sealed, no further investigation required. Marcus leaned forward, studying the photos. Who gave those orders? That's the strange part, Chen said. They came from federal sources.
Someone with enough juice to override local jurisdiction and shut down our investigation. I felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Elena hadn't been killed by her boyfriend. She'd been eliminated because she'd discovered something that threatened the real power behind this operation. Someone who could order both federal agents and local police to cover up evidence. Detective, do you have any idea what Elena might have been investigating before her death? I asked. Chen hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She called the precinct 3 times in the week before she died, said she had information about corruption in federal law enforcement. My captain told her to take it to internal affairs, but she said she couldn't trust anyone in official channels. Did she say anything specific? Only that she discovered evidence that someone high up in either the FBI or DEA was taking money to protect certain criminal operations. She said she had documentation, but we never found anything like that at her apartment. My blood ran cold. Elena had uncovered the same corruption that someone was now trying to pin on me, which meant her murder wasn't just about silencing a witness. It was about eliminating someone who could expose the real traitor within federal law enforcement. Detective, do you have any idea who Elena was planning to give this information to? I asked. Chen hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She called the precinct 3 times in the week before she died, said she had information about corruption in federal law enforcement. My captain told her to take it to internal affairs, but she said she couldn't trust anyone in official channels. Did she say anything specific? Only that she discovered evidence that someone high up in either the FBI or DEA was taking money to protect certain criminal operations. She said she had documentation, but we never found anything like that at her apartment. My blood ran cold. Elena had uncovered the same corruption that someone was now trying to pin on me, which meant her murder wasn't just about silencing a witness. It was about eliminating someone who could expose the real traitor within federal law enforcement. Detective, said Marcus, carefully, do you have any idea who Elena was planning to give this information to? Chen shook her head. She was paranoid, wouldn't say much over the phone, but she did mention meeting with someone she trusted, someone she called the bride. The words hit me like a slap. Elena had been trying to reach me, to warn me about corruption in the investigation. And instead of listening, I'd been so focused on maintaining my cover that I'd dismissed her nervous behavior at the wedding as pre-ceremony jitters. Where is Tony Ricci now? I asked. That's another problem, Chen said. According to the official report, he's fled to parts unknown, but I ran his credit cards and cell phone records before they were classified. Tony Ricci died in a car accident in Staten Island 2 days before Elena was murdered. The implications were staggering. Someone had killed both Elena and her boyfriend, then staged Elena's murder to look like a crime of passion while claiming Tony had fled. It was a sophisticated cover-up that required resources and access that went far beyond what any ordinary criminal organization could manage. Detective, you're taking a huge risk by talking to us. Why? Chen's expression hardened. Because I became a cop to protect people, not to help cover up murders. And because Elena Vescas deserved better than having her death turned into a convenient lie. As we left the coffee shop, my mind was racing with the new information. Someone within federal law enforcement had been taking money to protect criminal operations. That same person had ordered Elena's murder when she'd gotten too close to the truth. And now they're trying to frame me for the corruption that they'd been committing.
But who? Who had access to both FBI and DEA intelligence? Who could manipulate evidence and control the narrative of a major federal investigation? We need to get into Elena's apartment, I told Marcus as we walked toward our car. If she had documentation of federal corruption, she would have hidden it somewhere the killers couldn't find it. The building will be under surveillance, Marcus warned.
Then we'll have to be smarter than the surveillance. But as we drove through Brooklyn toward Elena's neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another trap. Because if Elena had really discovered evidence of high-level corruption, and if that evidence was still hidden somewhere in her apartment, then whoever had killed her would be watching for anyone who tried to find it. The building was a modest brownstone in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. As we approached, I saw what Marcus had warned me about: unmarked federal vehicles on both ends of the block, agents trying to look like ordinary civilians while maintaining visual contact with the building. "Too obvious," Marcus murmured. "Either they want us to see them, or they're not very good at their jobs." "Both," I said, recognizing one of the agents from bureau training seminars. "These are people I've worked with. They know how I think, how I operate." Which meant we needed to think like criminals instead of federal agents. Lucky for us, I'd spent the past year learning from experts. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized, but hoped never to use. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Isabella? Mija, where are you? Everyone is looking for you." It was my cousin Maria, Diego's 19-year-old daughter who'd somehow avoided arrest in the morning raids. The girl who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, who'd never been involved in the family business beyond Sunday dinners and birthday parties. "Maria, I need your help," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand that helping me could get you in trouble." "I don't care," she said immediately. "You're family, and I don't believe what they're saying about you on the news." "What are they saying?" "That you're a traitor who sold us all out for money. But I know you, Isabella. I know your heart. You wouldn't do something like that unless you had a good reason." The faith in her voice broke something loose in my chest. Here was someone who still believed in me, even after everything that had happened. Someone who understood that people could do terrible things for good reasons. "I need to get into Elena Vasquez's apartment," I said. "There's something there that could prove I'm being framed." "Elena's dead," Maria said quietly. "They found her yesterday morning." "I know, but before she died, she discovered something important, something that could clear my name and maybe prevent more people from getting hurt." There was a long pause. Then, "What do you need me to do?" 20 minutes later, Maria arrived at Elena's building with 2 of her friends from college, young women who looked like they belonged in the neighborhood, who could walk past federal surveillance without raising suspicion. They were carrying cleaning supplies and wearing matching t-shirts that identified them as a professional housekeeping service. But who? Who had access to both FBI and DEA intelligence? Who could manipulate evidence and control the narrative of a major federal investigation? "We need to get into Elena's apartment," I told Marcus as we walked toward our car. "If she had documentation of federal corruption, she would have hidden it somewhere the killers couldn't find it." "The building will be under surveillance," Marcus warned. "Then we'll have to be smarter than the surveillance." But as we drove through Brooklyn toward Elena's neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another trap. Because if Elena had really discovered evidence of high-level corruption, and if that evidence was still hidden somewhere in her apartment, then whoever had killed her would be watching for anyone who tried to find it. The apartment building was a modest brownstone in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. As we approached, I saw what Marcus had warned me about: unmarked federal vehicles on both ends of the block, agents trying to look like ordinary civilians while maintaining visual contact with the building. "Too obvious," Marcus murmured. "Either they want us to see them or they're not very good at their jobs." "Both," I said, recognizing one of the agents from bureau training seminars. "These are people I've worked with. They know how I think, how I operate." Which meant we needed to think like criminals instead of federal agents. Lucky for us, I'd spent the past year learning from experts. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but hoped never to use. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Isabella? Mija, where are you? Everyone is looking for you." It was my cousin Maria, Diego's 19-year-old daughter who'd somehow avoided arrest in the morning raids. The girl who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, who'd never been involved in the family business beyond Sunday dinners and birthday parties. "Maria, I need your help," I said carefully. but I need you to understand that helping me could get you in trouble." "I don't care," she said immediately. "You're family, and I don't believe what they're saying about you on the news." "What are they saying?" "That you're a traitor who sold us all out for money." "But I know you, Isabella. I know your heart. You wouldn't do something like that unless you had a good reason." The faith in her voice broke something loose in my chest. Here was someone who still believed in me, even after everything that had happened. Someone who understood that people could do terrible things for good reasons. "I need to get into Elena Vasquez's apartment," I said. "There's something there that could prove I'm being framed." "Elena's dead," Maria said quietly. "They found her yesterday morning." "I know, but before she died, she discovered something important. Something that could clear my name and maybe prevent more people from getting hurt." There was a long pause. Then, "What do you need me to do?" 20 minutes later, Maria arrived at Elena's building with two of her friends from college. Young women who looked like they belonged in the neighborhood, who could walk past federal surveillance without raising suspicion. They were carrying cleaning supplies and wearing matching t-shirts that identified them as a professional housekeeping service.
And at the bottom of the box, a letter addressed to me. "Isabella," it read in Elena's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I tried to call you the night of your wedding, but there wasn't time to explain everything. Someone in the federal government has been protecting our family's operations for years, taking money to keep certain investigations from moving forward. But now something has changed. They're planning to sacrifice everyone, our people, your people, anyone who knows too much about what's really been happening. I don't know who you can trust, but I know you'll do the right thing. The evidence in this box proves that Assistant Director Peter Blackwood has been taking cartel money for at least 3 years. He's the one orchestrating the frame job against you. Be careful who you trust. Some federal agents aren't who they seem to be." The letter was signed with Elena's full name and dated 2 days before her murder. Assistant Director Peter Blackwood. I knew the name. He was the Bureau's Deputy Assistant Director for Organized Crime, one of the most powerful people in federal law enforcement. If Elena was right, then the man overseeing our entire operation had been corrupt from the beginning. But that raised another terrifying question. How many other people knew about Blackwood's corruption? How many of the agents I'd worked with, trusted, considered friends were part of his operation? "We need to get this to someone we can trust," I said, carefully resealing the evidence. "Who?" Marcus asked. "If Blackwood has been running this operation for 3 years, he could have anyone on his payroll." It was a good question. Elena's evidence proved that corruption went to the highest levels of federal law enforcement, but it didn't tell us how far that corruption had spread. For all we knew, every agent involved in the Martinez investigation could be compromised. As we prepared to leave the basement, Maria grabbed my arm. "Isabella, there's something else. Something I didn't want to say in front of your husband." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but stepped away to give us privacy. Maria waited until he was out of earshot before continuing. "My father called me this morning, from jail. He said to tell you that the family knows you were just doing your job, that you were trying to protect us from something worse." "How could he know that?" "Because Vicente isn't just our grandfather, Isabella. He's been working with the FBI for 6 months, feeding them information about the cartels." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Vicente Martinez, the head of the crime family I'd been investigating, was a federal informant, which meant the entire operation had been designed not to bring down the Martinez organization, but to use them as bait to catch bigger fish. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Papa said Vicente made a deal when the DEA first approached him about the money laundering. He would help them identify the cartel connections in exchange for protection for the family's younger generation, kids like me who aren't involved in the business." Which explained why so many of the arrests had focused on the older generation while carefully avoiding the younger family members. It wasn't because of prosecutorial discretion, it was because Vicente had negotiated their safety as part of his cooperation agreement. But if Vicente was working with the federal government, then who was really running the criminal operation?
And why had Assistant Director Blackwood been taking cartel money to protect an investigation he was already controlling? Maria, I said urgently, does your father know who Vicente's FBI contact is?
She nodded. Agent Michael Santos. Papa said he's been the family's handler for months. I turned to look at Marcus, Michael Santos, who was studying something on his phone with intense concentration. The man I'd trusted with my life, the man I'd married in both fiction and feeling, had been working with my family since before our assignment had even begun. How many more lies was I going to discover before this was over? And more importantly, if Marcus had been Vicente's handler all along, if he'd known about the grandfather's cooperation from the beginning, what else had he been keeping from me? As we climbed the stairs back to street level, carrying evidence that could expose corruption at the highest levels of federal law enforcement, I realized that I still didn't know who I could trust. Elena was dead. My family was in jail. My partner had been lying to me about fundamental aspects of the operation. And somewhere out there, Assistant Director Peter Blackwood was orchestrating a cover-up that would destroy anyone who threatened to expose the truth about what had really been happening in New York's organized crime families. The game was bigger than I had imagined, the stakes higher than I'd understood, and the enemies more powerful than I'd prepared for. But I had Elena's evidence, I had the truth about Vicente's cooperation, and I had a growing understanding of how deep the corruption really went. Now I just had to survive long enough to do something about it. What happens when an FBI agent discovers that the criminal family she's been assigned to infiltrate is actually her own? This is the extraordinary story of Isabella Rodriguez, a federal agent whose undercover assignment becomes a journey through moral complexity, family loyalty, and the price of truth. Over the course of 25 years, this tale unfolds across wedding ceremonies and prison cells, safe houses and congressional hearing rooms, revealing how the lines between justice and compromise become blurred when love enters the equation. The story begins with what should have been a simple assignment: infiltrate the Martinez crime family through an arranged marriage. But as Isabella walks down the aisle of St. Anthony's Cathedral in Brooklyn, wearing her grandmother's silver locket and preparing to marry a man whose real name she doesn't know, she has no idea that she's about to discover truths that will reshape everything she believes about family, loyalty, and justice. Isabella Rodriguez stands at the altar of St. Anthony's Cathedral, resplendent in a wedding dress that belonged to a woman who died protecting her family. The irony isn't lost on her. She's wearing the gown of Elena Martinez while preparing to marry into the family that Elena died to expose. But this isn't a real wedding. It's an elaborate FBI operation designed to place Isabella deep within one of New York's most powerful crime families. Her husband is Marcus Chen, a man she knows only as Diego Santos, a mid-level enforcer with the Martinez organization. What Isabella doesn't know is that Marcus is actually a DEA agent running his own undercover operation. Two federal agents, each believing the other to be a criminal, exchange vows in a ceremony that will bind them together in ways neither expects nor understands. The reception at the Palazzo Romano is a masterclass in criminal elegance. 300 guests celebrate the union of two people whose marriage represents the joining of criminal enterprises across state lines. Isabella dances with her new husband, studying his face for signs of the violence she's been trained to expect from men in his position. Instead, she sees intelligence, caution, and something that might be genuine affection for the role he's playing. But the real shock comes when Isabella begins meeting her new family. Vicente Martinez, the family patriarch, reminds her of her own grandfather with his old-world manners and protective instincts toward the younger generation. Maria Martinez, Vicente's 19-year-old granddaughter, dreams of becoming a veterinarian and has no involvement in the family's criminal activities. These aren't the monsters Isabella had been prepared to infiltrate. They're people with complex motivations, genuine love for each other, and moral codes that sometimes conflict with their illegal activities. As the evening progresses, Isabella overhears a conversation that chills her blood. Two family members are discussing hiring an assassin,
And they mention her FBI affiliation. Her cover has been blown, and her life is now in immediate danger. But what she doesn't realize is that the conversation isn't about killing her, it's about eliminating Marcus, whom the family suspects of being a federal informant.
The wedding night that follows is a careful dance of deception as two trained agents try to maintain their covers while sleeping in the same bed. Neither can afford to drop their guard, but both are beginning to realize that their assignment is far more complicated than either had anticipated. The months following the wedding settle into a strange domestic routine as Isabella and Marcus learn to live as husband and wife while running parallel investigations into the same criminal organization. Their Brighton Beach apartment becomes a stage where they perform married life for the benefit of family members who drop by unexpectedly, while conducting their real business through carefully coded conversations and encrypted communications with their handlers. Isabella's relationship with the Martinez family deepens in ways that complicate her mission. She finds herself genuinely caring about Maria's college applications and Vicente's health problems. She attends Sunday dinners where Rosa Martinez, the family matriarch, treats her like the granddaughter she's always wanted. These aren't the cold-blooded criminals she'd been trained to expect. They're people struggling to balance family loyalty with the moral costs of their chosen profession. Meanwhile, Marcus is discovering that his role as Vicente's lieutenant gives him access to financial records that reveal a disturbing pattern. The Martinez organization isn't just running traditional crime family operations. They're laundering money for Mexican cartels, operations that involve levels of violence that go far beyond anything the family has historically engaged in. Someone is pressuring Vicente to expand into activities that threaten innocent civilians, and Marcus begins to suspect that pressure is coming from within federal law enforcement itself. The investigation takes a darker turn when Elena Vasquez, the family accountant, approaches Isabella with evidence of financial irregularities. Elena has been documenting suspicious transactions for months, building a case that someone within the family's federal contacts has been manipulating investigations and protecting certain criminal enterprises while prosecuting others. But before Elena can turn over her evidence, she's found dead in her apartment, the victim of what appears to be a robbery gone wrong. Isabella knows better. Elena's murder was professional, designed to look random while eliminating someone who'd become a threat to powerful interests. But the question remains, who ordered the killing, and how much did they know about Isabella's real identity? The personal stakes escalate when Isabella realizes she's developing genuine feelings for Marcus. Their marriage may have started as professional theater, but the intimacy of sharing secrets, supporting each other through dangerous situations, and maintaining a complex deception together has created something real. The problem is that neither knows the other's true identity, and both believe they're falling in love with criminals who could betray them at any moment. The carefully constructed world of Operation Family Ties begins to collapse when Isabella discovers that her assignment isn't what it appears to be. While searching Elena's apartment for evidence, she finds documents that reveal the scope of federal involvement in organized crime operations. The Martinez family isn't just being investigated, they're being managed, controlled, and manipulated by federal agents who are using them as assets in a larger operation against international drug cartels. The revelation that Marcus is actually a federal agent comes during a moment of crisis when family members discover their apartment has been searched by unknown intruders. Forced to drop their covers to protect each other, Isabella and Marcus finally learn each other's real names and real purposes. The relief of honesty is immediately overshadowed by the realization that their agencies have been running competing operations without coordination, creating conflicts that have endangered everyone involved. But the biggest shock comes when they discover that Assistant Director Blackwood, Isabella's FBI supervisor, has been taking payments from cartel leaders while manipulating investigations to protect certain criminal enterprises. The federal corruption they've been unknowingly investigating runs deeper than either agent suspected, involving multiple agencies and operations across several states.
Vicente Martinez emerges as a more complex figure than either agent initially understood. He's been serving as a federal informant, providing information about cartel activities while trying to protect his family from the escalating violence that federal manipulation has brought into their world.
His cooperation agreement includes provisions for family members who want to leave criminal life entirely, but it also requires him to continue laundering cartel money until federal agents can build cases against higher-level targets. The moral complexity of the situation becomes clear when Isabella realizes that her investigation isn't exposing corruption, it's participating in it. The evidence she's gathering will be used to eliminate certain criminal competitors while protecting others, and the family she's come to care about will be sacrificed to maintain cover stories that protect federal operations. Elena's evidence, hidden in multiple locations throughout the city, reveals the financial connections between federal agencies and criminal organizations. Bank records show payments totaling millions of dollars flowing from cartel accounts through federal investigative budgets. Recorded conversations capture federal agents discussing which criminals to protect and which to prosecute based on operational convenience rather than evidence of guilt. But Elena's murder was just the beginning of a cleanup operation designed to eliminate anyone who could expose the full scope of federal involvement in organized crime. Vicente is arrested on federal racketeering charges despite his cooperation agreement. Several family members are killed in what appear to be random acts of violence, and Isabella realizes that she and Marcus are likely next on the list of people who know too much about operations that were never supposed to become public. The safe house in Newark becomes a fortress where Isabella and Marcus examine Elena's evidence while trying to understand the scope of the conspiracy they've uncovered. The documents paint a picture of federal law enforcement that bears little resemblance to the idealistic institution Isabella joined after college. Instead of investigating and prosecuting criminals, agencies have been partnering with them, using criminal organizations as tools in larger geopolitical operations that prioritize international drug interdiction over domestic law enforcement. Assistant Director Blackwood's corruption is extensive, but not unique. Similar arrangements exist in Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, and Detroit, where federal agents work with organized crime figures to manage rather than eliminate criminal activity. The goal isn't to end organized crime, it's to control it, to ensure that criminal violence remains within acceptable parameters while generating intelligence about international drug trafficking networks. The revelation restructures everything Isabella thought she knew about her career and her purpose. Every successful case she's worked, every criminal she's helped prosecute, every moment of professional pride she's experienced, all of it was part of a system that was fundamentally compromised from the beginning. Federal law enforcement hasn't been fighting organized crime, it's been managing it, deciding which criminals to support and which to eliminate based on operational convenience rather than justice. But the personal revelations are even more devastating. When Director Walsh contacts Isabella directly, she learns that her assignment was part of an internal investigation designed to test her loyalty and moral flexibility. The FBI suspected Blackwood's corruption, but needed to determine how deep it ran and which agents could be trusted with sensitive operations. Isabella's assignment was not just to infiltrate the Martinez family. It was to serve as bait for corrupt federal agents who might try to protect their criminal assets. The conversation with Walsh reveals that Marcus has been part of the internal investigation from the beginning, working for both the DEA and a joint task force designed to expose federal corruption. His assignment as Vicente's handler was genuine, but it was also cover for gathering evidence about federal agents who were compromising investigations for personal gain. The moral complexity reaches its peak when Isabella learns that Vicente has been trying to extricate his family from cartel operations for months, but federal pressure has prevented him from reducing the money laundering activities that are endangering everyone he loves. His cooperation with federal authorities was supposed to provide protection for family members who wanted to leave criminal life entirely, but instead it's made them targets for elimination by cartels who believe they're providing information to law enforcement. Blackwood's death in what appears to be a car accident is actually an assassination designed to prevent him from exposing other federal agents involved in the corruption. But his elimination doesn't end the conspiracy. It simply removes someone who'd become a liability to people with even more power and influence within federal law enforcement.
The evidence from Vicente's safety deposit box reveals recordings of conversations with federal agents from multiple agencies, financial records showing the flow of cartel money through federal accounts, and proof that the corruption reaches into the highest levels of law enforcement leadership. But possessing that evidence makes Isabella and Marcus targets for elimination by people with resources that go far beyond anything a regional crime family could manage. The meeting with Director Walsh in a secure federal facility in Manhattan forces Isabella and Marcus to confront the full scope of what they've uncovered and what it means for their futures. Walsh's explanation of the operation reveals a level of institutional compromise that makes their individual moral struggles seem almost insignificant by comparison. The controlled management of organized crime isn't a corruption of federal law enforcement, it's official policy, developed over decades in response to the recognition that completely eliminating criminal organizations would create power vacuums that could be filled by more violent and less predictable groups. By working with established crime families and allowing them to operate within certain parameters, federal agencies believe they're preventing chaos while gathering intelligence about international criminal networks. But the human cost of this policy is devastating. Elena Vasquez died because she documented evidence that could expose operations designed to protect national security. Vicente Martinez will die in federal prison because his cooperation made him too dangerous to leave alive. Family members who never chose criminal life are being eliminated to protect cover stories that maintain federal credibility with international criminal organizations. The choice Walsh presents to Isabella and Marcus is stark. Continue working within the system, helping to manage these operations in ways that minimize civilian casualties, or be arrested for treason and conspiracy charges that will destroy their careers and their freedom. There's no third option, no way to expose the corruption without destroying the operations that federal agencies believe are protecting American cities from even worse violence. Isabella's decision to continue working within the system isn't a triumph of pragmatism over principle. It's recognition that perfect justice is impossible in a world where violence is inevitable. The goal isn't to eliminate moral compromise, it's to ensure that those compromises serve purposes that justify their human cost. The protection offered to Maria Martinez becomes a symbol of the good that can emerge from morally ambiguous operations. Her new identity, educational opportunities, and freedom from family criminal enterprises represent the possibility that future generations can escape the cycles of violence that trapped their predecessors. But that freedom comes at the cost of complete separation from the family and culture that shaped her, a sacrifice that will affect her for the rest of her life. Vicente's final message to Isabella acknowledges the complexity of what they've all experienced. His cooperation with federal authorities wasn't betrayal of family loyalty. It was recognition that family loyalty sometimes requires protecting family members from the consequences of criminal choices made by previous generations. His death in federal prison serves the larger purpose of disrupting cartel operations that threaten innocent civilians, but it also represents the failure of federal institutions to protect people who risk everything to provide information that serves national security interests. The years following the collapse of Operation Family Ties are marked by gradual healing and the construction of new relationships based on truth rather than deception. Isabella and Marcus build a real marriage that can survive the revelation of any secret, because they've already survived the revelation of all of them. Their relationship becomes a testament to the possibility that love can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances and survive the most devastating betrayals. Maria's transformation from crime family granddaughter to veterinarian represents the ultimate success of the sacrifices made by Vicente and Elena. Her new life in Oregon, her marriage to an environmental lawyer, and her children who will never have to choose between family loyalty and moral principle justify the human cost of operations that disrupted criminal enterprises while protecting innocent people caught in the middle. But the story doesn't end with simple redemption or clear moral resolution. Isabella's work training new FBI agents acknowledges the moral complexities she experienced
aren't unique to her particular circumstances.
Unique to her assignment, they're inherent in any work that requires good people to make compromises in service of larger purposes. The goal isn't to eliminate those complexities, but to prepare agents to navigate them with integrity and wisdom. The congressional hearings that eventually exposed the scope of federal involvement in organized crime operations don't result in wholesale condemnation of the policies Isabella and Marcus were asked to implement. Instead, they lead to reforms designed to provide better oversight, clearer ethical guidelines, and more support for agents working in morally complex situations. The recognition that perfect solutions don't exist is balanced by the commitment to ensure that imperfect solutions serve purposes that can be publicly defended and morally justified. Isabella's book, written years after her retirement, fictionalizes the events of Operation Family Ties, but preserves their emotional truth. The story she tells is about families, criminal families, federal law enforcement families, and chosen families that form around shared purpose rather than shared blood. It's about the different ways people can love each other, protect each other, and make impossible choices for each other in a world that offers no perfect options. The silver locket that belonged to Isabella's grandmother becomes a symbol of the way that love and strength pass between generations, sometimes in ways that aren't immediately visible. The women who wore it, Isabella's mother, Elena Vasquez, Isabella herself, and eventually Maria's daughter, all faced choices that required them to balance competing loyalties and find ways to protect the people they loved while serving larger purposes. 25 years after walking down the aisle in St. Anthony's Cathedral, Isabella finally understands what her grandmother Rosa meant when she wrote that families are defined by the choices people make for each other rather than by blood or tradition. The family that sustained Isabella through the moral complexities of her federal career wasn't the Martinez crime family she'd been assigned to infiltrate. It was the group of people who chose to stand with her when standing alone would have been safer. Elena Vasquez, who died documenting corruption that threatened innocent people, Vicente Martinez, who sacrificed himself to protect future generations, Maria Santos, who rebuilt her life around healing rather than harm, Marcus Chen, who chose partnership over convenience at every crucial moment. These relationships, forged in circumstances of extreme moral complexity, proved more durable than traditional family bonds based on genetics or shared history. The corruption that Isabella and Marcus exposed wasn't eliminated by their work. It was reformed, managed, brought under better oversight and control. The recognition that federal law enforcement would always require moral compromise was balanced by the commitment to ensure that those compromises served purposes that could be publicly defended and morally justified. The story that began with a wedding built on deception evolved into a marriage built on truth, a family built on choice rather than obligation, and a career built on the understanding that justice in the real world requires wisdom, courage, and the willingness to accept responsibility for morally complex decisions. Maria's children, growing up free from the cycles of violence that had trapped previous generations, represent the ultimate justification for everything their great-grandfather sacrificed. They will never have to choose between family loyalty and moral principle, because the choices made by previous generations have given them options that didn't exist before. But the story also acknowledges that every victory comes with costs, every choice forecloses other possibilities, and every generation must decide how to balance competing moral obligations in a world that offers no perfect solutions. The goal isn't to achieve moral purity, it's to ensure that the choices we make serve purposes larger than our immediate interests and protect people who deserve better than the world they've inherited. The Weight of Secrets is ultimately a story about the price of truth and the power of love to survive the revelation of any deception. Isabella Rodriguez begins her journey believing in clear distinctions between right and wrong, justice and injustice, family and enemies.
She ends it understanding that the real world requires practical wisdom rather than theoretical purity, that good people sometimes have to make bad choices to prevent worse outcomes, and that love is strong enough to survive even the discovery of fundamental betrayals. The wedding that opens this story represents everything false about Isabella's initial understanding of her mission. The ceremony is built on lies, celebrated by people she's planning to betray, and solemnized by vows that seem to have no meaning beyond operational necessity. But those same vows, to love and honor each other through difficult times, to support each other when external pressures threaten to destroy what they've built together, prove prophetic in ways that none of the participants could have anticipated. The family that Isabella discovers through her assignment isn't the criminal enterprise she'd been trained to destroy. It's a group of people struggling to balance competing loyalties while protecting those they love from consequences that earlier generations set in motion. Their crimes are real and serious, but so are their love for each other and their desire to create better possibilities for their children and grandchildren. The federal law enforcement system that Isabella serves isn't the idealistic institution she joined after college. It's a pragmatic organization that makes morally complex decisions in pursuit of purposes that sometimes conflict with traditional notions of justice. But that same system also provides opportunities for people like Maria to escape cycles of violence and build lives based on healing rather than harm. The marriage that begins as operational theater evolves into genuine partnership based on shared understanding of moral complexity rather than shared performance of conventional happiness. Isabella and Marcus learn to love each other not despite their flaws and compromises, but because of their commitment to making difficult choices while maintaining their fundamental humanity. This is a story about the weight of secrets and the liberation that comes from sharing that weight with people who understand its necessity. It's about the different forms that heroism can take, from Elena's quiet documentation of corruption to Vicente's willingness to sacrifice himself for future generations, to Maria's courage in rebuilding her life around different values than those she inherited. Most importantly, it's a story about the possibility that emerges when people choose truth over comfort, justice over simplicity, and love over loyalty. The world that Isabella and Marcus inhabit offers no perfect solutions, but it does offer the opportunity to make choices that serve purposes larger than their immediate interests and protect people who deserve better than the circumstances they've inherited. The silver locket that passes between generations of strong women represents the way that love and courage move through time, sometimes in ways that aren't immediately visible, but always in ways that matter. The women who wear it all face impossible choices, but they also all find ways to protect the people they love while serving larger purposes that justify the sacrifices they make. In the end, the weight of secrets is a testament to the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary choices when circumstances demand them, to find love and meaning in the most unlikely situations, and to believe that their individual decisions can contribute to a world that offers better possibilities for future generations. The story of Isabella Rodriguez, Marcus Chen, and the Martinez family represents just one thread in the larger tapestry of human experience, a tapestry woven from millions of individual choices about how to balance competing loyalties, navigate moral complexity, and protect the people we love while serving purposes larger than ourselves. If this story has resonated with you, if you found yourself questioning your own assumptions about justice and family and the prices we pay for the choices we make, then I invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complex realities of human experience, the moral challenges that define our relationships with each other and our institutions, and the possibilities that emerge when ordinary people choose courage over comfort.
These are stories about federal agents and crime families, but they're also stories about teachers and parents, doctors and lawyers, activists and public servants, people who face
Versions of the same moral dilemmas that Isabella and Marcus confronted. People who must decide how much they're willing to compromise to protect the things they value most. They're stories about the weight of secrets and the liberation of truth, about the different forms that love and loyalty can take, about the way that individual choices ripple through generations in ways that are impossible to predict but essential to understand. Most importantly, they're stories about hope. Hope that good people can make difficult choices without losing their fundamental humanity. Hope that love is strong enough to survive the revelation of any truth. Hope that the choices we make today can create better possibilities for the people who will inherit the world we leave behind. Subscribe now to join a community of readers who believe that stories have the power to help us understand our own moral complexities, that fiction can reveal truths about human nature that no amount of abstract analysis can capture, and that the choices we make in our own lives matter in ways that extend far beyond our immediate circumstances. Together, we'll explore the territories where love and loyalty intersect, where justice and pragmatism conflict, where ordinary people discover reserves of courage they never knew they possessed. We'll examine the institutions that shape our lives and the relationships that sustain us through the most difficult challenges we face. This is an invitation to embrace complexity rather than flee from it, to find meaning in moral ambiguity rather than demanding simple answers to complicated questions, and to believe that understanding the weight of secrets can help us carry that weight with greater wisdom and grace. Subscribe today and become a part of a conversation about the stories that matter most, the stories that help us understand who we are, who we might become, and how we can make choices that honor both our individual values and our collective responsibilities to each other. The journey continues, and your voice is needed to help us explore the moral territories that define human experience in all its beautiful, terrible, complex glory.